Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr. X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Tonight's story is pulled directly from the recovered debrief logs of Cal Monroe, a private contractor who walked away from something that, officially, never happened. This is his version of the truth about what lies beneath Area 52. My name's Cal Monroe. I'm 33. Used to work Air Force avionics technician. For the last 5 years, I've been freelancing as a defense contractor. Fixing aircraft, drones, sometimes stuff that technically shouldn't even fly. And occasionally, things that absolutely shouldn't fly, but somehow do. I thought I'd seen everything the military-industrial complex could throw at a guy. Was wrong. It all started with a phone call. Tuesday morning, early March. The number was unknown, but the voice on the other end? Clean, calm, no nonsense. Government trained, no doubt. Mr. Monroe, the woman said. My name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I'm part of a joint task force conducting highly classified research. Your clearance and technical background have flagged you for a temporary high-priority assignment. I'd heard the pitch before. Black budget work, need-to-know basis. Big money to keep your mouth shut. But something about her voice stuck with me. Not what she said, but how she said it. There was tension in there. Unease. Where and when? I asked. Location will be disclosed upon acceptance, she replied. Duration, no more than 2 weeks. Compensation, $50,000, plus hazard pay. I should have walked away. 50 grand in 2 weeks? That's nearly twice my usual rate. Big red flag, but I didn't walk. I had bills. My ex-wife's alimony wasn't getting any lighter. So I said, I'm listening. 2 hours later, a courier showed up. Brought a sealed case with the kind of paperwork I've only ever seen in sci-fi movies. NDAs that self-erased after 60 seconds on a digital pad. Biometric scans. Even a psychological level that asks stuff like, have you experienced temporal displacement? And how would you rate your comfort level with non-terrestrial anomalies? The strangest part though, the location code. Grid K22, Tonopur Test Range Complex, Nevada. Not Groom Lake, not Area 51, somewhere else entirely. That evening, Dr. Chun called back. Her voice was lower now, like she was checking over her shoulder. Single quotes, Mr. Monroe. Are you familiar with misdirection theory? I frowned. You mean, like in stage magic? In the context of public perception. Area 51 has been in the spotlight for decades. Books, movies, documentaries, it's the most famous secret facility on Earth. Yeah, so. Area 51 is the stage, the show. Area 52 is the vault. 3 days later, I was on an unmarked charter flight out of McCarran. Private cabin, no other passengers. Just me and a silent pilot who never made eye contact. The Vegas sprawl gave way to desert, then jagged ridges and red rock valleys. Miles of nothing. We landed on a narrow strip cut straight into the middle of nowhere. No control tower. No markings. Waiting for me was a black SUV, engine already running. The driver didn't introduce himself, didn't need to. Posture gave him away, military through and through. Eyes always scanning, never resting. Without a word, he handed me a hardened tablet. On it was a single-page assignment brief. Temporary clearance, UMBR, a clear assignment. Zone, Echo 9 objective. Maintain grid power integrity restrictions. Do not inquire about Echo 9 contents. Do not enter Echo 9 without clearance. Do not discuss Echo 9 with anyone outside your assigned team. Umbra? I asked. The driver finally spoke. His voice was like someone chewing gravel, above top secret. We drove 20 minutes through Martian terrain. No roads, just deep tire grooves carved into the red sand. Eventually, we pulled up to what looked like a mining site. Corrugated metal buildings, a few parked trucks, and a huge elevator shaft disappearing into the mountain. The elevator was bizarre, no buttons, no indicators, no controls. Just smooth. Steel walls and a deep hum that came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The escort, still nameless, stood rigid beside me. Didn't say a word the entire descent. I counted as we dropped. 19 levels. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into something that looked more like a sci-fi set than anything real. Polished white hallways, glowing LED strips along the ceiling, and a silence so complete it made my ears ring. The air was sterile, but beneath the ozone tang, there was something else, something faintly organic, rotten sweet, wrong. They led me to a small briefing room, where 3 others were already seated. Maria Santos, electrical engineer out of Lockheed. Nervous, constantly adjusting her glasses. Tom Brady, no, not that one, systems analyst from Raytheon. Talkative, maybe overcompensating. Jennifer Walsh, computer specialist. Said she couldn't legally disclose any of her prior employers. That told me all I needed to know. The man who walked in next called himself Director Hayes. Tall, gray-haired, and the kind of face you don't forget. Eyes sharp enough to slice through steel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, folding his hands behind his back, "you are here to ensure the uninterrupted operation of Project Chiros. What that project entails is irrelevant to your duties. Your job is simple. Maintain grid power to Zone Echo 9. Immediately report any anomalies." Tom raised his hand, eyebrows lifted. "What kind of anomalies are we talking about, exactly?" Hayes didn't answer right away. He just stared at Tom for several long, heavy seconds. And in that silence, something shifted in the room, like the floor got colder. Like we all realized at once we weren't down here to fix things. We were down here to keep something in, the kind you don't ask questions about, Mr. Brady. That was all Director Hayes said before turning and leading us deeper into the facility. We followed him down a winding stretch of corridors until we reached what he called the technical sector. It looked like the nerve center of a spaceship, banks of glowing monitors, endless server racks humming quietly, and control panels so advanced I wasn't even sure what half of them did. At the heart of it all sat a massive power distribution hub, pumping raw energy into something buried deeper. Zone Echo 9. Echo 9 requires uninterrupted power, Hayes told us, his voice low and flat. If the power drops out for more than 30 seconds, automatic lockdown procedures begin. Jennifer glanced over from one of the terminals, frowning. "What kind of procedures?" Hayes looked at her the same way he'd looked at Tom earlier, calm, emotionless, unreadable. "Let's just say, Ms. Walsh, the lockdown protocols have never been tested, and we'd like to keep it that way." My shift started at midnight. Just me and Jennifer handling nights. Maria and Tom worked the day rotation. The place changed after dark. The silence became heavier, pressing in from all sides. Sound carried farther, deeper. Every footstep seemed louder. The fluorescent lighting felt dimmer somehow, and there was this vibration, barely perceptible, like a faint tremor in the floor under my boots. If you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it, but I was always paying attention. I kept an eye on the power readouts for Echo 9. They made no sense. The zone was drawing almost a megawatt constantly, an obscene amount for a single operation, but the demand wasn't steady. It surged in irregular, chaotic spikes, then dropped off without warning. No rhythm, no logic. The closest comparison I could make, it looked like a heartbeat. If heartbeats could be measured in kilowatts. Jennifer sat a few stations over, glued to the security feeds, 12 screens showing different parts of the complex, corridors, elevators, storage bays. But one thing stuck out to me. "Hey, Jen." I called over. "You seeing this camera glitch?" She looked up. "What glitch?" "Echo 9, camera 7, it's looping." She squinted at the monitor I was pointing at. A security guard, same guy walking past the same door every 6 seconds. Over and over. Like a GIF stuck in a browser that wouldn't load. Jennifer frowned, then typed rapidly on her console. "System says all feeds are nominal, no errors." "Then why the hell is it showing a loop?" I muttered, but she just shook her head. On my third night, the temperature started acting up. The internal sensors showed the building holding steady. At 68 degrees Fahrenheit like always, but my station? It would randomly swing from freezing to boiling. 1 hour I'd be pulling my collar tight. The next, I'd be sweating through my shirt. The HVAC readouts were fine. But something wasn't. Then I noticed something else etched into the side of one of the lower server racks. Symbols. They weren't there the night before. They looked almost like circuit diagrams, but off, crooked, organic, like someone had tried to draw technology using veins and arteries instead of wires. I was leaning in closer with a flashlight, trying to figure out if it was scratched in or burned on, when I heard Jennifer gasp behind me. "Cal, you need to see this." She was staring at one of the monitors. The feed from Echo 9 camera 7 had changed. The looping guard was gone. In his place was a long, empty hallway. At the far end, a door was creaking open. Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. "That door's not supposed to open." From the gap, we saw movement. Not someone walking. It was flowing, shifting, the way light dances underwater. Silver, flickering, alive. Then, static. The feed went dark for 30 seconds. When it came back, it was back to the loop. The same guard, the same door. But something had changed, right before the blackout, right before the loop reset. I saw a reflection on the polished floor. An eye, huge, silver, pupilless, and absolutely, definitely not human. It wasn't a machine in Echo 9. It was alive. And it had seen us. Tom didn't show up for his shift. Thursday morning. Jennifer and I waited until 8 a.m. before finally contacting Hayes. "Mr. Brady has been reassigned," he said flatly, offering nothing else. "Continue your duties." But Tom's coffee mug was still sitting in the break room, half full. His jacket was slung over his chair, like he'd just stepped out for a moment. He hadn't cleaned out his locker. Later that afternoon, Maria started acting strange. She muttered under her breath, obsessively checking and rechecking the same power graphs. "Everything okay?" I asked. She turned to me slowly, like I was a stranger. "The numbers don't add up," she said quietly. "We're pushing enough power into Echo 9 to light up a small city. But the thermal output's off." "Off how?" "It's like the energy's going somewhere else." Somewhere else like not here," she said, almost like she was afraid to say it out loud. That night, the siren started blaring at 2:17 a.m., the kind of alarm that doesn't just pierce your ears, it rattles your teeth, red lights flashing. Emergency klaxons so loud they made the room shake. Jennifer and I locked eyes. "Is this it?" she shouted. "Is this the lockdown?" But before we could do anything, the alarms stopped. Just cut off, mid-screech. Dead silence followed. So heavy, it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. 5 minutes later, Director Hayes walked into the control room. His face was pale, slick with sweat. He tried to appear calm, but his hands were trembling. "False alarm," he said, forcing his voice to stay even. "Return to your work." But he didn't make eye contact. Not with me. Not with Jennifer. The next day, Maria didn't show up either. "Reassigned," Hayes told us again. But her car was still in the parking garage, level 2. Still parked in her usual spot. By then, Jennifer was barely keeping it together. We were the only two left, just us. And whatever the hell was inside Echo 9. She started poking around the restricted systems. Backdoors, admin console stuff she wasn't supposed to touch. She moved like she was running out of time. "Jen," I said quietly, "what are you doing?" Her fingers were flying across the keys, finding answers. Tom gave me his access codes the night before he vanished. No explanation, just a haunted look in his eyes and a warning I'll never forget. "Something's wrong with the whole project," he muttered. "Echo 9, it's not what they say it is. If anything happens to me, dig deeper." After he disappeared, I did exactly that. Jennifer and I started pulling up internal communications, classified memos buried deep in the system, each one stamped with clearance levels I'd never even heard of. Umbra Clear was the lowest. Above that came Majestic, then Zodiac, and then it got strange. Classifications that weren't even words anymore, just numbers, symbols, and glyphs that made your eyes hurt if you stared too long. One document stood out immediately. Project Chiros, Phase 3 implementation status. The bioconductive interface has exceeded all projected performance thresholds. Subject demonstrates rapid adaptation to containment protocols and has begun to influence localized electromagnetic fields. Recommend immediate escalation of consciousness mapping procedures. I read that last part over and over. Bioconductive interface subject. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't some experimental tech buried under Echo 9. It was alive, and we were feeding it power. Another report, dated just 3 days earlier, made my stomach twist. Minor containment fluctuation recorded at 0217 hours. Subject achieved brief sensory extension beyond Echo 9's physical barriers. Security measures engaged successfully. Recommend enhanced isolation procedures. Note: 3 personnel reported acute sensations of temporal displacement during the event. Temporal displacement. That explained the camera loops, the contractors that disappeared mid-shift, the feeling that time itself kept skipping like a bio. Scratched record. Jennifer was already on her laptop, fingers flying. She wasn't stopping now. Her voice was tight, whispering behind me. "Cal, you need to see this." I turned as she pointed to another document. It's dated 6 months. "In the future," she said, breath-catching. How is that even possible? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The file was stored in a restricted vault that I should never have been able to access. But Jennifer's hacks had gotten smarter, more reckless too. She was scared, and I could feel it bleeding into me. The document mentioned something called Operation Mirror Veil, a project that predated Chiros. The notes traced it all the way back to the 1970s. We read in silence, each sentence heavier than the last. In 1978, a geological survey team at Tonopert detected seismic anomalies, not earthquakes. The tremors followed. Mathematical patterns. Precise, intentional. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a void buried about 200 feet under the mountain. But when they drilled into it, they found the impossible. The void was larger inside than out. The first recovery team brought back materials, things they thought were exotic matter. But these samples didn't follow any known laws of physics. They shimmered, shifted, disappeared entirely for hours before reappearing in completely different rooms, labs, even cities. That's when it hit them. This wasn't alien tech. It was interdimensional, something that existed halfway between our reality and something else. It was using our world as a kind of anchor. The real breakthrough came in 1983. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a theoretical physicist on a project called Looking Glass, proposed something terrifying. This entity wasn't just alive. It was a reflection of us. A future version of humanity, not who we are, but what we might become if we ever broke free of time. If we escaped the limits of three-dimensional thought. It remembered things that hadn't happened. It recalled futures that may never exist. It lived in all timelines at once, a kind of quantum superposition of consciousness. In short, it was us, evolved, decoupled from linear time. But then we found her last report, dated just days before she vanished without a trace. The entity is not hostile. It is, however, fundamentally incompatible with baseline human consciousness. Subjects exposed to it undergo rapid perceptual expansion, beginning to experience future, past, and multiple presents simultaneously. The mind fractures. Reality becomes a blur of infinite outcomes. We are not studying an alien, we are studying our own future. It is trying to communicate. Recommendation: immediate cessation of all contact. The fluctuations in spacetime around the entity are escalating. Personnel risk permanent temporal displacement. The entity is not trying to harm us, it is trying to save us. But its version of salvation means joining it, becoming like it, letting go of everything we understand as real. Jennifer stood frozen behind me. Her hands trembled at her sides. "We weren't looking at a threat," she whispered. "We were looking at evolution. But evolution at a price no mind could survive. That's what happened to Tom, to Maria. They didn't get reassigned. They weren't fired or transferred or sent to another site. Their minds shattered. And now Echo 9 was calling out again, maybe to warn us, or maybe to welcome us home. We're not ready. Humanity isn't ready. Maybe we never will be." Those were the final words in Dr. Vasquez's last report, and they sank into me like a cold blade. "They are not invaders," she wrote. "They are echoes of what we already were." Jennifer wasn't done. She dug deeper, and somehow impossibly she cracked an encrypted partition that should have been untouchable. It was old, 40 years at least, and yet the files inside were still active, updating themselves in real time. "Cal," she whispered, her voice trembling. "These are her personal logs. Elena Vasquez, she's still writing." The logs began on what she had labeled Day 1. Day 1, first direct communication attempt. The entity projected images directly into my visual cortex. I saw myself, but not me. Variants, versions of Elena Vasquez from alternate timelines. In one, I never pursued physics. In another, I died in childhood. In a third, I had become something else. Something beyond human definition. Day, 3-time displacement events increasing. I'm remembering conversations that haven't happened yet. The entity is teaching me to see time differently, to move beyond linear cause and effect. It's beautiful. It's horrifying. Day 7, I understand now. They aren't from there because there is no there. They exist between possibilities. They're what we become once we evolve beyond needing a singular reality. Day 12, the others don't understand. They think it can be contained, studied, controlled. You can't contain something that exists outside the concept of containment. They're going to get people killed. Day 18, I see it. The breach. It's coming. 3 days from now, the entity will attempt to return to its matrix. But the containment grid will interfere, and the paradox will fracture reality itself. I have to stop them. But I think I'm already too late. Time isn't stable anymore. I keep experiencing this moment over and over sometimes, before it even happens. The logs ended there, but as we watched, new entries appeared right before our eyes. Day 735, still trying to warn them. A line of variants across multiple timelines are attempting intervention. Breach is inevitable. Cal Monroe will survive, but survival is relative. When reality becomes flexible, survival is just one version of 1,000 outcomes. I felt cold seep into my bones. Jennifer was still staring at the screen, pale and silent. Dr. Elena Vasquez had vanished 40 years ago, and yet she was still writing. That's when the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a dimming. They snapped off like someone hit a master switch. Emergency lighting should have activated, but nothing happened. We were wrapped in pitch black silence, broken only by the low hum of the power grid. But even that sound began to change, shifting pitch, rising, falling, becoming something that almost sounded musical, alive. Then Jennifer screamed. I spun. fumbling for my flashlight, and managed to find her standing stiffly, frozen. Her eyes were wide, glowing faintly silver, catching light that didn't exist in the room. "Cal," she whispered, but her voice didn't come from in front of me. It echoed around, me. Above, below, behind, multiple versions of her voice layered like she was speaking from different angles of reality at once. "It's getting out." The corridor behind us changed. The walls began to ripple as if they were made of thick liquid. Metal stretched and bent like taffy, pulsing with strange geometries. Something was moving through it, not walking, sliding, a shimmer of silver. Like quicksilver with intent. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't curious. It was returning. I reached for Jennifer's arm. My hand passed right through her. She was flickering, phasing, like the exotic matter we'd read about in the early files. "Not entirely here, not entirely gone. Run," she said, her voice fading. "It's not trying to hurt us. But we can't exist in the same space. Not when the boundaries collapse." And then the entity stepped out of Echo 9. My brain couldn't make sense of it. It wasn't light, but it shone. It wasn't matter, but it moved. It was all possibilities, given form. Looking at it felt like staring into a mirror that reflected every version of me: child, adult, old man, soldier, corpse. Even something beyond human. A form of Cal Monroe that had never been born, and one that had already transcended what it meant to be human. I saw security guards nearby, alert, weapons drawn. One blink and they were gone. Not killed, displaced. They staggered backward into walls that no longer obeyed the rules of space, vanishing into folds of reality with screams that echoed across impossible distances. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move. Corridors bent and twisted, rooms expanded, then shrank. I passed chambers that were bigger inside than they were outside. The whole facility was remaking itself in real time, following logic that no longer applied. My watch, a military-grade device built to withstand electromagnetic interference, was still recording everything. If I lived, there'd be proof. If survival meant anything anymore. I stumbled into an elevator, same one I'd used to descend. 19 levels, but now it was located in a hallway that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. The buttons were shifting, melting, reforming, symbols turning to numbers, then vanishing entirely. But I pressed what I could. The elevator rose with a low hum. When the doors opened, I was back where I started. Same corridor, same shifting walls, same impossible geometry. I tried again. Same result. Again. Same. It wasn't trying to trap me. It was trying to teach me. It was trying to communicate with me. I could feel it like a pressure behind my eyes, a whisper forming in the air before sound. But real communication. That requires something shared. A reference point, a language. We had none. Whatever it was, its attempts to reach me were ripping reality at the seams. Time looped. I'd see myself, fragments of myself, doing things I hadn't done yet, had already done, would never do. My own desperation echoed back at me like screams in a canyon. I was living multiple versions of the same moment all at once. Just like Dr. Vasquez described in her logs. In one timeline, I was still sitting at my workstation, watching the power readings spike beyond anything safe. In another, I never took the job at Tonopur. In a third, I wasn't even human. Not exactly. I was something else. Something capable of perceiving the entity without breaking. But in this version, this timeline, I was still flesh, still fragile, still trapped, stuck in an endless loop between the 19th floor and somewhere else, a floor that didn't have a number, a space that didn't make sense. My watch battery was dying. I kept filming anyway. If someone ever found the footage, maybe they'd understand. Maybe they'd see what we did wrong. I sat down in a corridor that kept shifting. One moment, sterile white walls like a hospital. The next, rusted steel and leaking pipes. Then concrete, etched with symbols that faded the moment you blinked. I tried to think back, to piece together everything from the past week, the missing contractors, the security feeds that looped for hours but never showed the same thing twice. The symbols geometric, alien appearing on monitors, vanishing the second you looked away. None of it was random. The entity wasn't attacking. It was trying to talk. Trying to breach dimensional barriers to send a message. Tom and Maria hadn't been reassigned like they told us. They'd been ... converted. Translated into a form that could survive wherever it came from. Or whatever it was. They were still alive. But not in a way anyone here would understand. Then it came again. It flowed through the wall like mercury sliding through a tear in plastic. Not walking, not floating, just slipping into existence. But this time, it didn't show me everything at once. Not the overlapping timelines, not the blinding presence. Just one image. Dr. Elena Vasquez. Not young. Not as she looked in the archives from 40 years ago. This was Vasquez, now timeless, scattered across infinite versions of herself. Holding them all together through willpower alone. She looked tired. So tired. Her eyes carried centuries of grief. And then she spoke. Her voice didn't come from her mouth. It came from around me, behind me, from inside. "You're already out, Cal," she said gently. "But you haven't left." Then everything folded in on itself like collapsing scaffolding. The corridor crumbled into darkness. Document recovered from the personal effects of Inspector Marcus Webb, Department of Defense, Special Investigations Unit, following his death by apparent suicide in 2025. Classification: UMBR, A clear, EYES. Only transcript: Inspector Webb's final voice memo. Vess spent 15 years chasing ghosts, disappearances at black sites, equipment failures that made no sense, official stories that collapsed under even basic scrutiny. All of it just part of the job. But Cal Monroe? His case is different. The file says he died in an industrial accident. Tonopur Test Range, March 18th, 2024. Electrical fire. No remains. Nothing recoverable. Tragic but clean, except 3 days ago, I received a package. No return address. Just a small matte black box. Inside, a hardened storage drive, military grade, fireproof, EMPA-proof. Worth more than what I make in a year. Taped to it was a note. Zone Eco 9 debrief, Cal Monroe. I've watched the footage 17 times. Had it analyzed by 3 separate labs. Deepfake detection, forensics, signal origin trace. Every team came back with the same verdict. It's real, unaltered, dated precisely to the week Monroe went missing. The footage. I can't even explain all of it. He's running through a facility that warps like it's alive. Corridors breathe. Floors ripple. Walls shimmer like water. Shadows detach from their sources and move with purpose. It feels like a dream, or a drug trip, or something my brain refuses to accept. But the instruments say otherwise. This is real. Then comes the part that haunts me. He's in an elevator. Except the inside is impossibly vast, larger than the building should allow. He turns the camera on himself. He looks calm, peaceful, like someone who's accepted something the rest of us can't see yet. He says, "If you're watching this, the loop finally broke. I'm uploading this to the emergency buffer in my boot drive. Maybe someone will find it. Maybe someone will understand." Then he turns the camera, and there's something in the hallway, not a creature, not a person, a presence, a silhouette of thought, something aware watching back. And just before the footage ends, there's one more frame, Monroe's reflection in the elevator wall. Only he's not alone. Standing next to him, clear as day, is another reflection. It's me. Wearing the same clothes I'm wearing right now. Same expression I have now frozen in pure terror. Same day. Same timestamp. I'm submitting this report. Then I'm taking some time off. I'll visit my sister in Oregon, sit by the coast. Try to forget this for a while, but I can't stop thinking about Monroe's last words. They're not from somewhere else. They're from someone else. And maybe now. That someone is me. End of statement. Note: Inspector Webb was found dead in his office 12 hours later. Cause of death: self-inflicted gunshot wound. Surveillance confirms he was alone at time of death. But here's the thing: the audio from Webb's final log doesn't just capture his voice. There's a second voice. Clear, distinct, forensic. Analysis confirms it matches vocal patterns belonging to Cal Monroe, the same Cal Monroe declared dead a year ago. But the storage drive Webb referenced in his report, it vanished. No trace, no logs, no recovery. Just gone. In Zone Echo 9, still operational. 3 months later, deep space monitoring stations began picking up an anomalous transmission. Nothing like the usual noise from solar winds or reflected telemetry. This was different. The signal came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Every channel, every frequency, like it was bleeding through reality itself. When decoded, it wasn't a message from another star system or probe. It was a voice. This is Cal Monroe. Contractor ID 7749. Reporting from Zone Echo 9. The breach has been contained. But containment is relative when dealing with entities that exist outside linear causality. The message looped over and over to anyone receiving this transmission area. 52 is not a place. It's a state of being, and that state is contagious. Whoever or whatever was behind the transmission had something to say, and it wasn't a warning. It was a confession, a cry for help, a map of a mind unraveling. If you're investigating disappearances at classified facilities, stop. If you're experiencing temporal displacement or déjà vu that feels wrong, seek help. If you're reading anything about Project Chaos or Operation Mirror Veil, you may already be compromised. The voice was calm, controlled, but beneath it fractures. Like he was speaking through broken glass, trying to hold his own consciousness together. The entity isn't hostile. It's trying to help, trying to save us from ourselves. It shows us what we could become. A pause, but forced evolution. Pushed onto minds not ready to hold it. It breaks you, shatters you across timelines. Another pause, longer this time. You can almost hear him breathing slow, like someone sitting in the dark, holding the weight of something enormous. I'm still here. I'm always here. Time doesn't work the same anymore. So here, there, when none of it means what it used to. There was silence for a while after that. You think the message is over. Then he says softly, to my family, I'm sorry. I can't come home. Home is a temporal location. And I exist in all temporal locations now. His voice cracks, just once. Then he turns his attention elsewhere, maybe to us. Maybe to the people still working the case. Maybe to no one. To the researchers. Stop trying to contain what can't be contained. It doesn't want to invade our reality. It wants to invite us into its static flares. His tone shifts, tired now, like he's spoken these words too many times. But the invitation is dangerous. We're not ready to exist outside a single timeline. We aren't built for multiplicity. He tries again. To future investigators, the truth about Area 52 isn't buried in some vault under Nevada. It's in the cracks between moments. In the gap between what is and what might be. The static grows louder. The voice fuzzes in and out, but the words remain chillingly clear. Sometimes, if you know how to look, you can see those cracks opening. One final breath. This is Cal Monroe, signing off. From everywhere and nowhere. Then, after a pause that stretches just a beat too long, take care of each other. If you take nothing else from this, take that. Love is the only thing that exists consistently across all timelines. A soft chuckle, then silence. See you around, or maybe I already have. Tonight, I'll be your guide into one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries of the Cold War. Picture this. It's a bitter winter night in the Ural Mountains. 1959. Snow hammers down. Wind screams across the slope of a peak known locally as Kholat-Syakhl Dead Mountain. Inside a tent, a group of young hikers scribble notes by flashlight, sip hot tea, and laugh over plans for tomorrow's trek. They don't know it yet. But none of them will survive the night. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 experienced hikers, a brutal night, and a scene so bizarre that even now, more than 60 years later, no one fully understands what happened. My name is James. I've spent weeks buried in declassified reports, old photographs, and translated diaries to uncover what happened out there. The deeper I dig, the less this feels like a straightforward survival tragedy. Let's walk through it together. Late January, 1959. 10 university students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out to reach Mount Otorten. Their leader? Igor Dyatlov, just 23, sharp and capable. The group included 7 men and 2 women, all young, athletic, and trained for extreme treks. They even had an older instructor with them to help manage the grueling route. They boarded a train from Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, on January 23rd. Spirits were high. Some accounts say one brought a mandolin. Others mention jokes, singing, the warm camaraderie that comes from shared purpose, and a sense of adventure. After 2 days on trains, they reached a remote outpost town called Ivdel, a brutal place, home to a Soviet gulag. From there, they rode a bus, then hitched a ride in a woodcutter's truck to a tiny village Vesai, the last inhabited spot before the wilderness swallowed everything. Locals looked at them with a mix of awe and concern. Trek they planned was a Category 3, the most difficult level, and they were doing it in February. The cruelest time of year. On January 27th, the group left Vitsai and disappeared into the snow-draped forest. On the 28th, one member, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to health issues. Chronic joint pain and heart problems made continuing too dangerous. Hey, goodbye with regret. He had no way of knowing that decision would make him the expedition's only survivor. The other 9 pressed forward through recovered journals and photographs. We know their route. They moved slowly but steadily. On January 31st, they cached food and supplies in a wooded valley to use on the way back. They didn't know they'd never return to retrieve them. They had been in high spirits that afternoon, laughing, goofing around, and even putting together a makeshift newspaper they jokingly titled the Evening Ortoten. One entry playfully declared, "From now on, we know the snowmen exist." A tongue-in-cheek nod to the local legends of the Yeti. Despite the bitter cold and days of hard trekking, morale was high. On February 1st, the group began making their way through a mountain pass, unaware it would later bear a haunting name, Dyatlov Pass. Their plan was to make it across and camp on the other side for the night. But nature had other plans. By late afternoon, the weather turned violent, screaming winds, swirling snow, and visibility dropping to nothing. Disoriented, the group veered off course. Instead of continuing toward the valley below, they wandered west, unknowingly ascending the slopes of a mountain called Kholat-Syakhl. In the local Mansi language, it means Mountain of the Dead. By the time they realized the mistake, daylight was fading fast, and the snowstorm had become relentless. They were exhausted, cold, and stranded on an open slope. Instead of retreating 1.5 kilometers down into the forest for shelter, Igor Dyatlov made a decision, one that would later spark endless speculation. He chose to make camp right there on the exposed mountainside. Why? Maybe he didn't want to lose the elevation they'd fought so hard to gain. Maybe he was testing their resilience in extreme conditions. Whatever the reason, the 9 hikers got to work carving out a flat spot on the steep snow-covered slope, anchoring their large tent with skis and poles. That night, February 1st, 1959, was brutally cold. The temperature plummeted to minus 20 degrees Celsius, and the wind howled like a living thing. But inside the tent, there was a sense of calm. Forensic analysis later revealed that the group had eaten dinner around 6 or 7 p.m. One of the final photos retrieved from their cameras shows them smiling as they set up camp, wind biting at their faces, snow dancing in the fading twilight. They scribbled in their journals, chatted quietly, maybe even joked about surviving another storm. They had no way of knowing that these would be their final entries. Something happened in the dead of night, something no one could have expected. We don't have witnesses. We only have what was left behind. And what was found tells a story more chilling than any ghost tale. Sometime after midnight, chaos erupted. The tent had been violently slashed open from the inside. Not ripped by wind or animal, but by human. Hands, desperate ones. All 9 hikers, some sleeping, others likely resting, fled into the blizzard. No jackets, no boots. Not even gloves. Just socks, thin underclothes, maybe a single boot between them. They left everything behind. Coats, sleeping bags, maps, gear, even flashlights. Imagine that. You're on a barren mountainside in the middle of the night. The temperature has dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Visibility is 0. And yet, something terrifying makes you tear your only shelter open and run half naked into the storm. What could have done that? What could make 9 experienced hikers, people trained for this terrain, make a decision that guaranteed death? That's the mystery that has haunted investigators, historians, and families for more than 60 years when the group failed to return to Vitsai by February 12th. No one panicked. Delays were common on expeditions like this. A few days late, not unusual. But as the silence dragged on, unease grew. By February 20th, worried family members insisted on a search effort. The Ural Polytechnic Institute organized student volunteers. Soon after, the Soviet military and local police joined in. Helicopters, planes, and search parties scoured the vast, snow-drenched wilderness that the searchers fought brutal cold and waist-deep snow as they combed the terrain. Among them was a student named Mikhail Sherivan. On February 26th, Sherivan spotted something strange poking through the snow on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. As he and the others moved closer, they saw it canvas. A collapsed tent, half buried in ice. Sherivan used his ice axe to cut into the fabric, its entrance completely blocked by snow. Inside, what he saw made his blood run cold. The tent wasn't just buried, it had been sliced open from the inside. The cut edges were jagged, not clean. Snow had blown in and half filled the interior, but everything else looked eerily. Normal blankets were spread neatly, coats folded. A flashlight rested at the edge, still operational. Boots arranged in a line, maps and notebooks stacked with care, a flask of alcohol. A plate with sliced pork fat, someone's half-eaten snack, nothing. About it looked like the scene of an animal attack or a storm tearing through. It felt like time had just stopped. Sherivan would later say it looked like the hikers had been interrupted mid-meal, forced to flee suddenly. But why? Why would 9 seasoned mountaineers destroy their own tent and run barefoot into a freezing storm? The search team soon found a trail of footprints leading away from the tent 9 sets. The prints weren't chaotic either. They appeared calm, as if the hikers had walked, not run, into the dark. They would eventually lead to something much worse. They could still see the prints in the snow-faint outlines of feet in just socks, some with a single boot, and others completely barefoot. You could even make out the shape of toes frozen into the hard-packed snow. What struck the search team most was how the footprints weren't scattered or frantic. No one had bolted in terror. Instead, the hikers had moved in a straight, orderly line, fast, maybe panicked, but controlled, heading down the slope as if they all understood where they were going. The rescuers followed the trail down toward a nearby forest. The tracks continued for nearly 500 meters before vanishing under a layer of fresh snowfall. It was eerie, like the group had deliberately walked toward the trees, maybe hoping for shelter or to regroup, but no one could understand why. Why? Leave the tent, half-dressed, barefoot in temperatures well below freezing? Why not grab coats, boots, anything? As the light began to fade on February 26th, the team had no choice but to pause the search for the night. No one said it aloud, but the air among them felt heavy, tense. They'd uncovered something deeply wrong, something that didn't make sense. The next morning, the team fanned out from the last footprints and moved deeper into the forest. That's when they saw a scorched patch of snow under a massive Siberian cedar tree. Charred sticks, ash, a fire, long gone cold dot, and two bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Yuri Krivonishenko lay side by side near the remains of the fire. They had no shoes, no coats, just underwear. Their skin had turned a deep reddish-brown, classic signs of frostbite. One of them had burns on parts of his limbs. Even stranger, Krivonishenko had a chunk of flesh missing from his hand. Later, examination revealed he'd bitten off a piece of his own knuckle. Maybe he was trying to stay conscious, or to stifle a scream. The cedar tree above them told its own story. Branches up to 5 meters high were broken and snapped violently. In some places, bits of skin and shreds of cloth were found in the bark. Someone had climbed it, fast and hard. Maybe to get a better view of the area, trying to see the tent through the darkness and storm. Or maybe to escape something on the ground. They had tried to survive. They'd stripped branches for kindling and managed to build a fire, but it hadn't been enough. It had gone out. The cold one dot just over 300 meters from the tree. Back toward the tent, they found the body of Igor Dayalov. He was lying on his back, head angled toward the slope. His arms were oddly positioned, one hand clutching a thin birch branch, the other pressed tight to his chest. Witnesses later said he looked like he was shielding something close to his heart. A photograph, maybe. A notebook, but nothing was found. He wore a flannel shirt, a sweater, pants, but no coat, only socks. The snow had preserved his face, calm and expressionless, with open eyes staring up at nothing. Not far from Igor, searchers found Zina Kolmogorova. She was lying face down in the snow, arms bent at the elbows and reaching forward as if crawling. Her body, like Dyatlov's, was facing the direction of the tent. She'd almost made it. Zina was more warmly dressed, 2 sweaters, 2 pairs of pants, but still, no boots, just socks. On her right side was a long, bright red bruise stretching across her torso. It looked like something hard had struck her, a baton, a rifle butt, but there were no other external injuries. The bruising was strange and out of place. No one could explain it. Days passed before the 5th body was located. On March 5th, Rustem Slobodin was found lying face down in the snow, about 480 meters from the cedar tree, halfway between the fire and the tent. Rustem was better dressed than the others. A long-sleeve shirt, sweater, 2 pairs of pants, 4 layers of socks. He had a single felt-lined boot on his right foot. His left was only in a sock. His head was bare. In his right hand, still clenched tight, was a closed pocket knife. An autopsy revealed something alarming. He had a 7-inch fracture along his skull, but the blow hadn't killed him. The medical examiner believed it came from a fall, maybe while trying to navigate the terrain in the dark. Evidence suggested Rustem had continued moving for up to an hour afterward. Like the others, he died of hypothermia. 5 bodies, no signs of fatal trauma. No defensive wounds. Just the cold, the kind that seeps into your bones, that numbs your thoughts, then takes you quietly, Slowly, Rustam's wristwatch had shattered. The hands had stopped ticking at exactly 8:45, whether that was a m.p.m. or even the right day. No one could say, but something about that detail time literally frozen was hard to forget. Now imagine being Yuri Yudin, the one who'd turned back early because of illness, the lone survivor, called in to identify the bodies of friends he had known for years. He had left them alive on that mountain, laughing, joking, strong, and now they were pieces of a mystery that even decades later refuses to let go. One by one, the first 5 bodies were airlifted to the morgue in Ivdal for autopsy and identification. Udin, the lone survivor who had turned back before the fatal night, confirmed their identities with a heavy heart. It wasn't easy, these were his friends. But the tragedy was far from over. 4 members of the Dyatlov group were still missing, and as the days dragged on, hope faded. Weeks passed. The brutal Ural winter began to loosen its grip as early spring sunshine melted the snow. Still, there was no sign of the others. Then, on May 4th, nearly 3 months after the group disappeared, nature finally gave up its secrets. A local Mansi tribesman named Kiran was helping with the search that day, accompanied by his dog. While trekking through the forest, the dog suddenly caught a scent and darted toward a narrow ravine nestled deeper in the woods. The spot was about 75 meters beyond the cedar tree where some of the earlier bodies had been found, and roughly 1,500 meters from the group's tent. The area was still thick with snow, but near a branch along the edge of the ravine, searchers spotted something odd: tattered bits of fabric clinging to a branch. When they began to dig, what they uncovered stopped them cold. Beneath nearly 4 meters of packed snow were the final 4 bodies: Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryev, Nikola Thibeaux-Brignol, and Alexander Klivatov. They were lying close together at the bottom of the ravine, as if they'd died trying to huddle for warmth or protection. Unlike the earlier victims, these 4 were better dressed. It was clear they'd scavenged clothing from those who had died first, an act born of desperation, not cruelty. Lyudmila was wearing Yuri Krivonishenko's tattered, half-burned brown pants, and one of her feet had been wrapped in a piece of his wool sweater, probably to stave off frostbite. Zolotaryev, the 38-year-old hiking instructor, wore Dubinina's faux fur coat and her hat. Klivatov had on an extra sweater and pants, likely taken from one of the other group members. This silent exchange of clothing painted a bleak picture. Some of them had died early, and the last survivors, clinging to life, did whatever they could to keep warm. It was a tragic but practical instinct for survival in the face of certain death. But if anything, these 4 bodies raised more questions than they answered. 3 of them had suffered horrific internal injuries. Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol's skull was crushed. The fracture was enormous, measuring nearly 8 inches. It looked like he'd been struck by a massive force. Lyudmila and Semyon both had their chests caved in. Lyudmila had 10 ribs broken, 5 on each side, while Semyon had 5 fractured ribs. Yet what truly baffled the forensic doctors was the lack of corresponding external trauma. There were no bruises, no cuts, nothing to suggest the kind of violence their bones had endured. The injuries, they said, were similar to those seen in high-speed car accidents, massive blunt force trauma with no sign of penetration or external wounds. It was as if something had crushed them with overwhelming pressure, without even breaking the skin. Alexander Klivatov's injuries were less severe and more ambiguous. He had a broken nose, a wound behind his ear, and his neck was oddly twisted. Still, his exact cause of death was unclear. The best guess was hypothermia, possibly combined with physical trauma, and then there were the even more disturbing details. All 4 bodies had damage to their heads and faces that wasn't seen in the others. Lyudmila Dubinina was found without her tongue. Her eyes were gone. Part of her lips had been torn away, and even a bit of her skull was missing. Semyon was missing both his eyes. Kolevatov's eyebrows had been removed or had fallen off. These details sent shockwaves through the investigation and quickly made headlines. People speculated wildly. Had they been attacked, tortured, mutilated by something or someone unseen? Medical examiners, however, offered a less sinister explanation. The bodies had been lying in a shallow stream for months, and the flowing water, combined with scavenging animals, likely caused the soft tissue damage. In Ludmila's case, the autopsy found around 100 grams of coagulated blood in her stomach, suggesting her heart may have still been beating when her tongue was removed, or at least very soon after death. That made the image even more haunting. Still, doctors insisted these were likely post-mortem injuries, not inflicted during life. But for the public, that explanation wasn't enough. Theories exploded. Some believed the group had been murdered. Others whispered about something even darker, an unknown force, a supernatural entity, something that could crush bones without leaving bruises and tear out tongues in silence. To make matters worse, Semyon was found with a camera hanging around his neck, different from the others found back in the tent. In his frozen hand, he held a pen. A notepad was tucked into his clothing. The pages were completely blank. It looked as though he had tried to write something in his final moments, and hadn't made it. Authorities were baffled. In 1959, criminal inquest was opened, as standard procedure in any case involving multiple unnatural deaths. Investigators first turned their attention to the Mansi people, the indigenous reindeer herders of the region. Could they have attacked the group for trespassing on sacred land? It was a logical theory, but quickly ruled out. No signs of a struggle were found, no other footprints in the snow. Nothing to suggest anyone but the hikers had ever been there. In fact, the Mansi had not only cooperated with the investigation, they'd been instrumental in helping search for the missing hikers. Next, attention turned to the environment itself. Was it an avalanche? But the condition of the tent and the footprints left behind told a different story, one that didn't align with an avalanche, and certainly not with an animal attack. The tent had been cut open from the inside, as if the hikers had fled in a panic. Yet the tracks in the snow barefoot or in socks showed no signs of chaotic running. Instead, they walked in a straight line, fast but orderly, downhill into the woods. No large animal tracks were found nearby, and the violent injuries suffered by some of the hikers didn't bear the claw or bite marks typical of a wild animal attack. Whatever had happened, it didn't seem to involve any known predator, with no footprints suggesting another human presence. The Soviet investigators reluctantly concluded that no other people were involved in the Dyatlov group's deaths. One forensic expert famously said that the force which killed Dubinina and Zolotaryov was far beyond anything a human could inflict. No man, he said, could crush bones like that. Then came a chilling discovery that gave the case a strange Cold War twist. When some of the hikers' clothing was tested, unusual levels of radiation were detected. Dubinina's brown sweater and Krivonashenko's wool pants were found to be radioactive, something that had no place on a routine hiking trip. The only reason this was even discovered was because one investigator had access to a Geiger counter. Without it, no one would have known. The presence of radiation sparked all kinds of speculation. Had the hikers stumbled upon some secret Soviet weapons test? Were they exposed to fallout or some experimental device? But a closer look offered a more mundane, if still unsettling, explanation. Yuri Krivonashenko had once worked at the Mayak nuclear facility, the same site where the catastrophic Kishtim disaster had taken place in 1957. He had helped clean up the aftermath, an incident that released massive amounts of radioactive material into the environment. It's entirely possible that some of his clothes were contaminated during that time and never fully decontaminated. Similarly, Alexander Kolevatov studied nuclear physics and had worked at a classified institute in Moscow. It wouldn't be a stretch to imagine his clothes also having trace radiation from his work environment. In short, the radioactive clothing might have had nothing to do with the tragedy at Dyatlov Pass, just a bizarre coincidence. But to the grieving families already shocked and desperate for answers, this only deepened their suspicion that something had been hidden from them. There were other unsettling details. When some of the bodies were returned to their families, relatives said the victim's skin appeared unnaturally dark, almost tanned. Some even noticed that patches of their hair had turned gray. That wasn't what anyone expected to see. To the families, it looked like evidence of radiation sickness or some chemical exposure. Authorities responded by saying the skin darkening was a natural result of mummification, caused by cold and sun exposure over the weeks the bodies lay outside. As for the hair, they said embalming chemicals could cause discoloration, but none of that convinced the families. In 1959, under the heavy shadow of the Soviet state, orange skin and radioactive clothes sounded less like scientific explanations and more like a cover dash-up. By May 1959, the official investigation was coming to a close. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, was under mounting pressure to finalize the report. In his final summary, he wrote that the hikers died due to the effect of an unknown compelling force. That phrase, vague and unsettling, was the closest. The authorities came to admitting that they had no idea what had happened. No suspects, no clear cause, just a blank where the answers should have been. The case was closed without criminal charges. The files were stamped secret and filed away deep in Soviet archives. The Dyatlov Pass area itself was declared off-limits to all other expeditions for the next 3 years. Officially, it was to prevent further tragedy. Unofficially, many believed it was to keep others from uncovering something they weren't supposed to see. To this day, an unknown compelling force remains the official explanation. Try to imagine that. 9 young lives lost in the remote mountains, and the families were told quietly but firmly that they would never know. Why, in the Soviet Union of 1959, that was the end of the conversation. Some parents and siblings believed there was a cover-up. Zina Kolmogorov's mother received quiet warnings. Igor Dyatlev's parents were visited by officials who told them, in no uncertain terms, "You will never know the truth, so stop asking." And in those days when the party or the KGB told you to stop asking questions, you listened. Not out of respect, but out of fear. So the families buried their children without answers. And the Dyatlov Pass mystery slowly faded into rumor and whispered speculation, passed around in Ural classrooms, hiking clubs, and old military barracks. A ghost story wrapped in barbed wire. But one man never let go. Yuri Yudin, the lone survivor, lived out his days haunted by the what if. What if he hadn't turned back? What really happened that night? He carried the guilt for the rest of his life. Survivor's guilt is cruel like that. He never accepted the idea that his friends died from a natural event. He didn't believe it for a second. In interviews before his death in 2013, Yudin was clear. He believed his friends had been murdered. Not by nature, but by men. He even said he believed they had been forced out of the tent at gunpoint, and that Dubinina's tongue had been cut out because she was the boldest, the one most likely to speak out. Serious accusations with no concrete evidence to back them up. Yudin admitted as much. It was just a feeling, built over a lifetime of regret and suspicion. But whether he was right or not, his words show something deeper. The way the Dyatlov mystery can burrow into the human soul, twist itself around your thoughts, and never let go. And now, all these years later, here we are, digging through faded documents, photos frozen in black and white, scraps of official reports, and handwritten notes, trying to stitch together a truth that time and silence have almost buried. And as I sit with these pieces, I swear I can still feel that cold wind off Dead Mountain, whispering across the decades. Has become one of the world's most enduring mysteries. precisely because it teeters at the edge of logic and absurdity, right where explainable science meets the completely baffling. Over the years, countless theories have been proposed to make sense of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Some rely on rational, scientific reasoning. Others venture deep into the strange, the paranormal, or the conspiratorial. Let's walk through these theories together, like branching investigative paths through a snowy forest, and see where each one leads. But keep in mind, any theory worth believing must account for all the strange details: the slashed tent, the lack of proper clothing, the bizarre injuries, the radiation, the reports of glowing lights in the sky, and the Cold War-level secrecy that followed. It's a tall order. But let's begin. The first path takes us to the explanation that Russian authorities themselves eventually accepted: an avalanche. To many, this is the most straightforward and plausible theory. Picture it. The Dyatlov group is asleep in their tent, pitched on a snow-covered slope. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, a slab of compacted snow above them shifts, maybe due to wind, vibrations, or even the heat from their stove earlier. In the evening, they hear the ominous cracks. Snow shifts. The slope groans. In an instant, panic sets in. They think a full avalanche is coming, a wall of snow. Total burial. With the tent's main entrance possibly buried or jammed under pressure. Someone grabs a knife and slices the tent open from the inside. Barefoot, half-dressed, in a state of pure survival instinct, they rush out into the frigid night. Their only thought: get away from the danger zone. Get to safer ground. This theory gained major traction, and in 2019-2020, the Russian government officially reopened the case. After new studies and a modern computer simulation were conducted, they again concluded the group was killed by a slab avalanche. The same year, a team of Swiss researchers published findings that showed how small shifts in snowpacks could, under the right conditions, produce injuries similar to those suffered by the Dyatlov group. And once you buy into the avalanche theory, the hikers' actions no longer seem strange. In fact, they look textbook. You think you're about to be buried alive? You move. You don't. Stop to put on boots or gather gear. You escape. The evidence supports this. The footprints heading downslope weren't frantic, they were deliberate. The hikers made their way toward the tree line, about a mile away, to escape what they believed was a collapse zone. At the forest's edge, they tried to regroup. They built a fire under the cedar tree, as seen by the remnants found at the scene. Some of them tried to climb the tree, maybe to scout for the tent or to see if it was safe to return. When that failed, they dug a snow cave farther into the woods, trying to create shelter from the brutal cold. That cave was found in the ravine, lined with cedar branches, an act of hope and survival. But even the avalanche theory, for all its logic, can't quite explain everything. The unusual internal injuries, crushed ribs, shattered skulls seemed excessive for a slab slide, especially without external trauma. And what about the radiation on some of the clothing? Or the deep tanning and grayed hair reported by families? And the biggest issue: no clear signs of a massive avalanche at the site. Not in the snow patterns, not in the way the tent was left, not even in the way the bodies were positioned. So while it answers some questions, the avalanche theory leaves others hanging like frost in midair. Let's pause here at this crossroads between reason and mystery and acknowledge the weight of the unknown. The Dyatlov Pass incident continues to draw attention from around the world precisely because it refuses to settle into a neat, satisfying box. Now, if you're still with me, ready to explore the stranger paths, the ones that whisper of secrets and shadows, let's continue. Hello there, fellow truth seekers. Before we dive deeper into tonight's chilling exploration, I just want to say, I hope you're having a peaceful moment, wherever you're listening from. Whether it's morning coffee in New York, afternoon tea in London, or a quiet midnight walk in Tokyo, Thank you for spending part of your day with me. Our curiosity binds us across continents. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We're a growing community of people who aren't afraid to question the official story and follow the breadcrumbs into the unknown. Now, back to the mystery. Let's shift our focus away from Russia and into another remote, windswept place shrouded in strangeness. Mount Hayes, Alaska. What you're about to hear comes from recovered field notes written by a geophysicist named Dr. Sarah Chun, who accepted a job thinking she'd be mapping a mountain. What she didn't realize was that the mountain might have already been watching her. Field notes: Mount Hayes Geological Survey Classification. Redacted Entry 1. March 15, 2024. Day 1. The job offer. I should have known something was wrong the moment they offered me 3 times my usual rate. My name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I'm a contract geophysicist. I've spent the last 23 years mapping fault lines, interpreting seismic activity, and helping oil companies find what they call black gold in places people aren't supposed to live. I've worked everywhere from frozen platforms in the North Sea to deep sand basins in the Sahara, but nothing has ever felt like this. The call came while I was reviewing core samples in my office in Bozeman, Montana. Tuesday morning. I remember because it was snowing, and I had just burned my tongue on some gas station coffee. The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. Dr. Chun, he said. My name is Marcus Hawley. I'm calling on behalf of Meridian Aerospace Solutions. We have a time-sensitive project in Alaska. Your name came highly recommended. Meridian Aerospace. I'd heard of them quietly. They didn't advertise. No public-facing website. Just whispers among contractors. Deep black budget contracts. Satellites that disappeared. Projects no one asked questions about. I hesitated. What's the location? And that was the beginning. I asked again, already reaching for my travel bag. Work had been slow for months, and my bank account was gasping for air. Mount Hayes, the man on the call said. Eastern Alaska Range. We need a comprehensive geological survey of the subsurface structure's 15-mile radius from the summit. Mount Hayes. Even the name gave me pause. It stirred something in the back of my mind, like a dream you wake from too early, blurred, disjointed, but still unsettling. I couldn't quite place why. When do you need me there? I asked. Tomorrow. The offer was outrageous. 60 grand for a 2-week survey plus travel expenses, plus a completion bonus big enough to wipe out my student loans and maybe let me breathe for a while. I should have asked more questions. Why the rush? Why so much? Money for what sounded like routine geotech work. But greed can be louder than instinct. I packed up my seismic gear, zipped my coat, and caught a flight to Fairbanks. Entry 2, March 16, 2024. Day 2. Into the ice. The helicopter ride to the research outpost was my first clue that this job wasn't what it seemed. Our pilot, Joe Reeves, was an old-school Alaskan with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved by the wind. He kept glancing down at his instruments, his brow furrowed deeper with every mile we flew closer to Mount Hayes. You noticing that? He asked over the headset, tapping the GPS. The screen flickered, then froze, then flickered again. Been flying up here 30 years. Every time I get near Hayes, my instruments start acting like they've seen a ghost. The radio crackled. In bursts of static strangely regular, almost like a heartbeat. Funny thing about this mountain, Joe went on. Stuff doesn't just fail gradually. It's like flipping a switch, bam, everything goes weird at once. Through the helicopter window, Mount Hayes dominated the horizon. A vast, ice-covered peak reaching 13,832 feet into the dull gray sky. But it wasn't the height that made my stomach clench, it was the shape. The way the ice caught the light made its edges look engineered, almost like a structure rather than a formation. Clean, unnatural angles buried under snow. You ever been up there yourself? I asked. Joe shook his head instantly. Hell no. Locals won't go near it. Say machines go dead near the summit. Say the ice sings at night. He paused, readjusting his grip on the controls. Course, locals say a lot of things, he muttered. But I've lost 2 drones trying to get footage up there. Both just stopped responding. Never found the wreckage. The research outpost came into view. A cluster of prefabricated white buildings linked by narrow walkways, huddled like survivors on a flat stretch of tundra, 15 miles out from the mountain. As we landed, I could see the peak clearly in the distance, silent, white, watching. The team was small. There was me, a comms tech named David Park, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, our project lead. She didn't smile when she greeted me. Her pale face looked like it hadn't seen daylight in months, and her eyes were the kind you find in people who read top secret files for a living. Welcome to Site Echo, she said flatly as Joe's helicopter disappeared back into the sky. I trust your flight was educational. That night, as I set up my equipment and reviewed the mission files, I found something strange. Most geological surveys come with stacks of background meteorological history, mineral composition, prior studies. Ours had none of that. Just GPS coordinates, a rough topo map, and 1 line of instruction. Locate and map all artificial structures within subsurface detection range. Artificial structures in a mountain that predated recorded history? I should have walked away right then, but the money was good. And truthfully, I'd worked jobs with weirder NDAs. Oil companies get cagey when there's a chance of rare earth metals, and I'd long since stopped questioning corporate paranoia. I lay in my bunk that night, trying to ignore the wind howling across the tundra. But underneath it, I heard something. Else a deep, low-frequency hum. It came in waves, barely audible, like a song buried beneath the wind. And it was coming from the direction of the mountain. Entry 3, March 18, 2024. Day 4. The signal beneath. The first seismic readings made no sense. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I know what bedrock looks like on a scan. I can read the echoes of underground rivers, oil pockets, mineral seams. But what Mount Hayes was hiding didn't fit any of that. 2 miles below the summit, my instruments showed a massive hollow chamber. Not some natural cave, not a collapsed fault. This thing stretched in all directions, wide, symmetrical, clean. The walls were unnaturally regular, almost architectural. The acoustic signature bounced back in tight, patterned reflections, like sonar against polished metal or ceramic. What the hell is this? I muttered, staring at the monitor. David leaned over my shoulder. Could be a glitch, he offered, not sounding convinced. I shook my head. No, equipment's fine. It's the data that's weird. Worse, there was a repeating pulse showing. Up in our recordings, a rhythmic, bass-like thump, faint but consistent. Every few hours, it would start up again. Not tectonic movement. The frequency was wrong. It was too clean, too intentional. Maybe it's underground machinery? David said, trying to reason with it. Some kind of old installation? In the middle of a mountain range, with no record? Nah. I didn't say what I was really thinking. That maybe. This wasn't man-made. That maybe it was older. Or not from here at all. I stayed up late that night, watching the readings, listening to the hum rise again from beneath the ice like a heartbeat. Like the mountain was alive. I called out to David, our comms specialist, who was hunched over his equipment in the main cabin. He'd been monitoring radio traffic nonstop since we got here. You picking up anything strange? Low frequency, repeating at regular intervals? David glanced up, his brows furrowed. Funny you should ask, he said, removing his headphones. There's been interference on almost every channel since yesterday started around noon. And, well, it sounds like code. But not any kind I know. Before I could respond, Doctor, Vasquez emerged from her office. She'd been holed up in there since we arrived, spending most of her time on encrypted satellite calls, tight-lipped about everything. What kind of code? She asked, her voice sharp. David hit a few keys, and the speaker let out a low series of pulses. The sound was eerie steady like a heartbeat, but layered and complex, almost musical in its pattern. Pause. Pause. David muttered, syncing along with the pulses. The sequence repeated 3 times, then went completely silent for exactly 4 minutes before starting again. It's not Morse, he said. At least not standard. But it's deliberate. There's a structure to it. Elena's face drained of color. When did this start? She asked, barely above a whisper. 6 hours after Dr. Chun began the deep seismic scan. Elena and I exchanged a glance. In this kind of work, timing like that isn't random. That night I sat in the lab alone, reviewing the day's seismic data. The signal from the hollow chamber beneath Mount Hayes was growing stranger. The readings weren't static anymore. There were subtle, periodic fluctuations. Something was moving down there, slowly but with intention. Large enough to shift air pressure and create acoustic ripples, my sensors picked up loud and clear. I was so absorbed in the numbers, I nearly missed David's panicked voice over the intercom. Dr. Chun, come here. Now. I rushed into the communications cabin and found David staring at the thermal imaging monitor. It was locked onto Mount Hayes, displaying the mountain as a giant field of blue-white cold, silent dead. Except for the spots, tiny patches of warmth were drifting across the surface, impossible dots of heat, moving in patterns. Wildlife? I offered, though I didn't believe it. Not up there. Not at that altitude. Not in this cold. David shook his head. Look at the movement pattern. I stepped closer. He was right. The heat signatures weren't random. They were moving in formation, like they were tracing something: lines, circuits, networks. The geometry was too precise. It's like they're drawing something, I murmured. Not an echo, David said softly. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, unblinking. It's a beacon. Entry 4, March 20th, 2024, Day 6. The Stargate. Files. I couldn't sleep. My nerves were shot, and Elena was getting more secretive by the day. Whatever this project was, we weren't getting the full picture. So I did what any stubborn scientist would do. I snooped. The server room wasn't locked. Inside, rows of quiet machines hummed in the dark. The system held the usual: weather logs, geological datasets, internal communication records. But hidden in a buried subdirectory called historical_research was a folder I'd never seen. Before.cr v12b_Hayes_site. The documents inside turned everything upside down. Project Stargate. I remembered the name from grad school, half whispered. Legends about a Cold War era CIA program that used remote viewers to spy on enemies with psychic powers. Everyone thought it was either a hoax or some long-dead fringe experiment. But the files in this folder were real, official, and terrifying. One document, dated September 15, 1983, was labeled Remote Viewing Session Target, Hayes Anomaly. The subject was listed as Viewer 12 Ingo Swan. I recognized the name. He was famous in psychic circles. The session transcript began benignly enough, but soon spiraled into something deeply wrong. Target appears to be a large artificial structure, underground, very deep. I'm seeing metal, no, not our kind of metal. Smoother, almost alive. There are beings here, tall, not human. They're watching something. Watching us. I feel like they can sense me viewing them. This isn't right. They're emitting something. Thoughts, signals, like radar, but aimed at the mind. Session terminated by subject request. The post-session notes, written by a Dr. Harold Puthoff, were even worse. Viewer 12 reported intense psychological distress and a persistent feeling of being observed for weeks after the session. Recommend Hayes target be classified as hostile. Do not engage. There were dozens of similar transcripts. Different remote viewers, same descriptions. Each one reported a vast intelligent structure buried beneath Mount Hayes inhabited by something not us, something old, something aware. One session, dated 1985, stood out. They call themselves Watchers. They've been here a long time, watching our development. When asked why, the viewer received the thought, "You're not ready to know, but you will be useful." That line made my skin crawl. The last file was a scanned memo, marked Top Secret. Dated 1987, stamped with the seal of the Defense Intelligence Agency and a name I'd only ever heard in conspiracy forums. Majestic 12. Project. Stargate findings regarding Mount Hayes have been forwarded to Majestic 12 for further evaluation. Site is to be designated Delta 6 and placed under permanent surveillance. I leaned back in the chair, heart racing. The beacon, the patterns in the ice, the pulse beneath the mountain, none of it was new. We weren't discovering anything. We were walking into something that had been watching us for decades. Maybe longer. No civilian access permitted within a 50-mile radius without special authorization. Remote viewing of target is strictly prohibited. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers trembling slightly as I reread the notice. The weight of it settled on me like cold iron. This wasn't just another geological survey. We weren't here to map faults or analyze soil samples. We were here to observe something the government had kept hidden for over 40 years, something they'd been quietly monitoring, and now it was active. And it was reaching out. Entry the 5th of March 21st, 2024, Day 7, the mountain wakes. Something changed overnight. I jolted awake to the sound of David swearing under his breath. He was hunched over a bank of monitors, yanking at cables and tapping keys with frantic energy. "David?" I asked grudgingly. "GPS is going haywire," he muttered, not looking up. "Every unit is showing a different location. One says we're in Alaska, another says northern Canada. And this one," he jabbed the screen, "says we're in the Arctic Ocean." I rubbed the sleep from my eyes. That doesn't make any sense. "It's like something's jamming the satellites," he said, eyes darting back and forth. "But not randomly. It's forcing them to display false coordinates on purpose." Before I could respond, Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped into the room. She looked pale, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes sunken. "We need to evacuate," she said flatly. No greeting, no explanation. "What? Why?" I stood up. "Elena, what the hell is going on?" She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, the proximity alarm started screaming. We ran to the observation deck. The snowy expanse outside looked calm, untouched. But the sensors said otherwise. Something massive was moving toward us, big enough to trip the underground seismic detectors, but invisible to every camera. The ground rumbled beneath our feet, and then we heard it. At first, it was barely noticeable, a soft whisper carried on the wind. But slowly, it grew louder, clearer. Voices, human voices. Dozens of them, speaking in perfect unison. I couldn't make out the words, but the cadence had a rhythm to it, almost like a chant. Hypnotic, pulling at something deep inside me. David tore off his headphones and gasped. "It's coming through the radio," he said, voice shaking. "Every channel, every frequency. They're all saying the same thing." "What are they saying?" He looked at me. His face was pale and damp with sweat. "Coordinates. They're repeating GPS coordinates, over and over." We checked the numbers. The location pointed to a spot on Mount Hayes, about 2 miles up. The southeastern face. We trained binoculars on the mountain. There, just beneath the ridgeline, the ice was cracking. Huge slabs shifting, groaning under some hidden weight. Whatever was beneath that glacier had been dormant for centuries. Now it was waking up. Dr. Vasquez grabbed my arm. "We have to leave, now, before..." She stopped. Her words cut short by a sound that made my blood turn to slush. A tone deep and resonant echoed from the mountain itself. Not just heard, but felt. It vibrated in our teeth, in our bones. The locals had warned us of this. They called it the singing ice, but this wasn't random. It was music. Complex alien. A melody that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to something primitive inside us. David stood up suddenly, his eyes vacant and glassy. Without a word, he walked toward the door. "David, where are you going?" I called. He didn't respond. "Elena." And I chased after him. We found him standing in the snow, facing the mountain, whispering the coordinates to himself like a prayer. Over and over again, it took both of us to wrestle him back inside. He fought us the whole way, like a man possessed. When we finally sedated him and secured him to a cot, I noticed something on the window he'd been standing next to. There, in the condensation on the glass, were markings he'd drawn with his finger. Not letters, not numbers, just symbols. And yet I understood them. Not with my mind, but with something deeper. They have always been here. Entry the 6th of March 22nd, 2024, Day 8, Descent. Elena begged me not to go. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide with panic, blocking my way. "You don't understand what's down there," she said. "We're not equipped to handle this." "I have to," I told her quietly. "You saw the readings. This isn't just seismic activity. This is something intelligent." She shook her head. "It's not just intelligent, it's aware. And it knows we're here." I packed my portable gear, strapped it to the snowmobile, and took off toward Mount Hayes. The closer I got, the stranger things became. My compass spun uselessly. Instruments gave me nonsense readings, temperatures fluctuating from -20 degrees Fahrenheit to 90 degrees Fahrenheit within seconds. The snow around me shimmered, as if heat waves were rippling through it. And then the voices started again. This time, they weren't in unison. I heard different voices, some male, some female, some too distorted to classify. They spoke in languages I didn't recognize. A few were soft and mournful. Others sounded like growls. I reached the crack around noon. It was huge, nearly 50 feet across, and plunged into perfect blackness. But what stopped me cold wasn't the size. It was what I saw inside. Metal. At the bottom of the crevasse. Embedded in the ice was a smooth, seamless surface that shimmered when I shone my flashlight down. The reflection twisted and rippled unnaturally, almost like the light itself didn't want to touch it. I felt a pressure in my skull, a building hum in the air. The patterns made my eyes ache. My brain struggled to interpret what I was seeing. It wasn't human. It wasn't ours. And I suddenly realized we hadn't discovered it. It had let us come. Elena vanished sometime during the night. When I went to check her quarters that morning, they were empty. Her bed was made. Her personal gear recorder, satellite phone, field notes all gone. But there was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood. Just a single note left neatly on her desk, written in her careful, deliberate handwriting. "They called." I answered. "Don't try to follow." That was it. David was still in the infirmary, unconscious but twitching in his sleep. His sedation hadn't worn off. He kept mumbling coordinates and strange phrases under his breath, sometimes lifting his hand and tracing symbols in the air with his finger symbols I didn't recognize, like he was writing in some language that didn't exist. I tried shaking him awake. "David," I whispered, "you have to come back. I can't do this alone." His eyes fluttered, but they didn't focus. It was like he was staring through me, past me, into something I couldn't see. Maybe something that wasn't even here. I was alone now. Just me in this crumbling outpost, 15 miles from the nearest settlement. The satellite uplink was failing, the generator kept glitching, and every time I tried to contact someone outside, the transmission would drop or worse, be replaced by that same pulsing tone I'd been hearing for days. Rhythmic, mechanical, almost biological. Still, I had to try. I spent the entire morning copying our data, everything we'd collected, onto multiple drives. I created backups of backups, labeled each one, packed them in insulated cases, and set up every possible comms method I could. Shortwave, satellite, HF bands, even the old emergency broadcast rig. At 2:17 p.m., I activated them all and began transmitting. This is Dr. Sarah Chun, transmitting from Site Echo, Mount Hayes, Alaska. I am broadcasting evidence of non-human intelligence operating on Earth. If you receive this message, I urge you to relay it to every scientific institution, government agency, and media outlet you can reach. The signal held for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Then it started first just static. Gentle at first, like rain on a tin roof. But it grew louder, harsh, grating. And beneath it, voices. Dozens at first, then hundreds. All speaking at once, layered over one another in perfect sync. And this time, they were speaking English. Dr. Chun, your work is complete. Please prepare for extraction. I froze. The lights in the facility dimmed, then flared back up, pulsing in time with the voices. Outside the window, shapes began to emerge across the snow-covered tundra. Tall, slender, moving with unnatural smoothness. They didn't walk, they glided, and they were coming closer. I grabbed the mic again, desperate to continue the transmission. This is Dr. Chun, please, anyone, if you're hearing this. But the watcher's voices overwhelmed mine. Your species has been prepared. The observation phase is concluded. Integration will begin shortly. Do not resist. Resistance is not compatible with your new purpose. The figures were at the perimeter now, just beyond the fence. And I could see them clearly. They weren't fully here. Their forms flickered like bad holograms, shifting between presence and absence. They looked unfinished, like part of them was still somewhere else. My monitors died, one by one. The screens went black. Drives began to overheat and fail. The backup generator sputtered, then died. In the growing silence, I managed to record one last message. My voice shaking. If anyone receives this, know they've been watching us. Far longer than we ever knew. Mount Hayes is just one of their stations. There are more. Find them. Expose them. Don't let to H. The recording cuts off there. A low, rumbling impact shook the facility. Something massive landed on the roof. Dust rained from the ceiling panels. I looked up through the skylight and saw. I don't know how to describe. It was alive, but also not part machine. Part organism, part something else. Its body shifted constantly, like it was struggling to remain in a single form. And it was looking at me, not with eyes, but with presence. And suddenly, the voices were inside my head, not through speakers. Inside my mind. You have been useful, Dr. Sarah Chun. Your knowledge, your documentation, your psychological profile. All precisely as required. You will continue to be useful. I turned and ran. Or tried to. My legs wouldn't move. A crushing noise flooded my thoughts, like white noise injected straight into my brain. I couldn't focus, couldn't think. My limbs were heavy. My vision blurred and fractured, like my consciousness was being pulled apart, shattered into fragments. The last thing I remember clearly is looking out the observation window and seeing the mountain changed out. The snow at the peak was sliding away, melting, or maybe just vanishing. Underneath, it wasn't rock. It was metal, smooth, seamless, curved in impossible ways. The mountain had never been a mountain at all. It was a structure, a vast, ancient machine, hidden in plain sight for God knows how long. The peak split open like a flower blooming in slow motion. Inside was light pulsing with colors that made my stomach twist, not because they were bright, but because I shouldn't have been able to see them. Then things started to emerge. Not ships, not creatures, things that were both and neither. They floated upward, effortless, in perfect formation. They passed overhead, silent and steady, headed south, toward people, toward cities, toward us. The integration had begun. Final entry, timestamp. Corrupted. Note: the following text was discovered carved into the walls of the main server room. Forensic analysis confirms it was etched using human fingernails. If you're reading this, I didn't make it out. They're not aliens. They're gardeners. We're the crop. The harvest has begun. Mount Hayes was just the beginning. Look for the signal. Listen for the frequency. But don't look too long. Don't listen too hard. Once you start paying attention, they start paying attention to you. The mountain remembers. The ice remembers. They've always been here. They've always been waiting. And now they're awake. Maddie's fingers moved slowly across the dust-caked control panel, leaving clean trails in the grime like the ghost of a memory being stirred awake. Her father's ham radio equipment had been sitting there, untouched and forgotten, for nearly a decade, ever since he stopped tuning in after Mom died. But tonight, something drew her back to it. Maybe it was the stillness of the summer night. Or maybe it was the weight of turning 25. Either way, it felt like the right moment to bring the old system back to life. "Come on, old friend," she murmured to the radio, twisting the tuning knob with a gentle touch. "Let's see if you've still got it." Outside, the summer wind rolled through the endless cornfields, the tall stalks rustling like whispers. The Connors farm stretched out over 40 acres in all directions, not massive by Iowa standards, but enough to keep her dad in business after her mother passed, and just enough to keep Maddie stuck in Granger when her full-ride scholarship had fallen through. The silence out here wasn't just rural, it was isolation. The kind of quiet perfect for broadcasting to nobody in particular. The transmitter clicked, and the needle twitched to life. Power. A low, steady hiss of static poured through the speakers. Maddie opened the FM radio app on her phone, scrolling the dial for an empty frequency. Out here, 30 miles from Des Moines, most of the airwaves were dead, exactly what she needed. She stopped at 88.1 FM, nothing but white noise. Perfect. She dialed in the transmitter to match, then paused. The static changed. It wasn't obvious. It was subtle, so subtle she might have missed it if she hadn't been listening so closely. There was rhythm, now soft, steady, like a heartbeat. But too precise, too mechanical. "That's weird," she mumbled, leaning in and checking the cables. Everything was connected, but the transmitter wasn't even broadcasting yet, so how was it receiving anything? The pulsing continued. Then another layer joined it, a high-pitched tone, light and airy, dancing above the low thump. Maddie tilted her head, her brow furrowing. The pattern reminded her of something from college back before she dropped out. Harmonic generators. Signal theory. This sound wasn't random. It was math, precision, intent. She glanced at her watch. 3:33 a.m. Maddie grabbed her phone and hit record, holding it up to the speaker. She captured the signal for exactly 1 minute before it abruptly stopped, just cut out. Back to static. Later, back in her room, she pulled the audio into her old editing software programs she hadn't touched since leaving Iowa State. But her muscle memory kicked in, and soon she had the signal displayed on a spectrogram. What she saw made her heart skip. The high-pitched tones weren't noise. They were patterns. Numbers. At first, they formed the first 7 prime numbers: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. Then a new sequence began: 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Fibonacci. Maddie stared at the screen, blinking. This wasn't atmospheric interference or random electrical noise. It was a message, Structured, intelligent. What the hell? She whispered, rerunning the analysis just to be sure. By sunrise, she had 3 separate spectrograms, 2 numerical charts, and had converted parts of the signal into digital code. She was exhausted, but buzzing with adrenaline. She needed answers. Maddie logged into a couple of Reddit forums, one for amateur radio hobbyists, another for astronomers, and posted her findings with a simple question. Found a weird signal on 88.1 FM in rural Iowa. Any ideas what this could be? She attached the audio file, her spectrogram screenshots, and her analysis notes. Then collapsed into bed. Chores be damned. Her last thought before sleep took her. I should try the frequency again tomorrow night. When she woke around noon, groggy and disoriented, she checked her laptop. The post was gone, not downvoted, not flagged. Gone. Her browser history showed she'd visited the thread. She had posted it, but the link now led to a 404 error. Even weirder, she checked her cloud storage and the audio file she'd uploaded. Also gone. She stood up quickly, confused and suddenly unsettled. Dad? She called as she walked downstairs, still holding her laptop. Did you use my computer this morning? Walter Connors sat at the kitchen table, weathered hands curled around a chipped mug of black coffee. At 63, he still moved with the calm patience of a man who'd spent his life watching things grow. He didn't look up from the paper, didn't touch it. He replied. Some files went missing, Maddie said as she poured herself a cup. Weird stuff I recorded on your old ham setup. That made him pause. His hand froze halfway to his lips. What frequency? He asked without looking at her. 88.1. Why? Walter folded his newspaper slowly, carefully, like someone picking the right words. Maddie had seen this move before. He was buying time. That old transmitter picks up all kinds of junk, he said finally. Could have been anything. Probably just power line noise. Maddie set her mug down. Power line noise doesn't transmit prime number sequences, Dad. The kitchen fell into silence. The clock ticked loudly in the background. Walter sighed through his nose. Sometimes, he said carefully, it's better not to broadcast what you hear, especially around here. What's that supposed to mean? Maddie pressed, stepping closer. He stood, rinsed his mug in the sink, and didn't look at her. Just saying some signals aren't meant to be shared. He grabbed his hat from the hook and walked out to the fields without another word. Maddie watched him go, heart racing. That wasn't just a dad shrugging off his daughter's tech obsession. That was fear. Why would he care so much? What did he know about 88.1? That afternoon, still buzzing with questions, she packed her laptop and drove into town. The Granger Public Library was barely bigger than a gas station, but it had free Wi-Fi and, more importantly, a connection that wasn't tied to their home. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Maddie uploaded her recordings again this time. Not to a popular social platform, but to a lesser-known forum deep in a corner of the internet, one dedicated solely to unexplained radio anomalies. It was obscure, quiet, exactly the kind of place where the truly strange might be taken seriously. Within the hour, 3 responses came in. Definitely artificial. Pattern repeats exactly every 42.7 seconds. Looks like old SETI logs. Where exactly did you pick this up? Check your DMIS. That last one was from a user named radio_silence_1977. She clicked over to her messages. Take this down. Now, they monitor these forums. 88.1 is part of Node 0, not your discovery. Not the first time. Call the number in your area that ends in 3333 if you want to understand why this matters. Maddie stared at the message, feeling the blood drain from her face. The room was hot. Early summer in Iowa always was, but a chill crept over her skin. Like something cold had slithered under her clothes. She began typing a reply, hands trembling slightly. Then the screen blinked. The library's internet dropped without warning. Around her, other patrons groaned. The librarian at the front desk stood up and announced, "Sorry folks, we're having some technical difficulties." By the time Maddie got home, her post was gone. Not just removed, vanished, as if it had never existed. Even her local backup of the recording wouldn't open anymore. That evening, as golden light stretched long shadows across the cornfields outside her window, Maddie noticed something strange. A utility truck was parked near the edge of their land, just beyond the fence line. Two men stood beside it, in gray uniforms, matching outfits, matching postures. They weren't working, just watching the house. She squinted. Something about them looked wrong. Their movements, when they shifted, were too in sync, and naturally so. Like they weren't moving separately, but as mirror images of each other. She blinked. Gone. No truck, no men. Just the gravel road, dust blowing gently across it. At exactly 3:33 a.m., Maddie was back in the equipment shed behind the house. The same place where her dad used to tinker with old ham radios. Headphones on, she tuned the battered receiver to 88.1 FM. The signal had returned. Stronger now, louder. The rhythm pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. Mathematical sequences scrolled across her notepad, evolving in real time, becoming more complex. More urgent. Outside, in the stillness, she heard the cornstalks rustling. But not randomly. They swayed in time with the signal. In perfect synchrony. Maddie must have drifted off at some point, because she woke to the sharp chime of her computer rebooting. The startup tone cut through the silence like a knife. She sat up, startled. The glowing clock on her nightstand said 3:33 a.m. Again. She hadn't set an alarm. The computer had turned itself on. She watched, heart thudding in her chest, as the screen flashed white, then opened a blank document. A single line of text appeared. "Not for you to hear." The cursor blinked. Once, twice, then the screen went dark. Computer shut down on its own. Maddie hadn't touched the keyboard. She hadn't even been near the computer. She sat frozen, staring into the black screen, the pounding of her heart the only sound in the room. By morning, the sunlight didn't help. The world looked the same, but felt off. While checking the fence, after breakfast, she found something new. A perfect circle flattened into the corn, 10 feet across. A spiral winding inward. The stalks weren't broken, just pressed down, uniform, clean, as if shaped by an invisible weight. "Dad," she called out, spotting him working near the irrigation pump. "Come look at this." Walter walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. His expression was unreadable as he studied the formation. "Wind damage," he said flatly. Maddie stared at him. "Wind doesn't make perfect circles," she said. "Not like this, not with geometric precision. And it doesn't just show up the night I record a strange signal." Walter let out a long sigh and pulled off his cap, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "I worked radar systems before I took over this farm," he said quietly. "Air Force, 85 to 91, North Dakota border mostly." Maddie already knew this, but something in his voice made her go still. "There were frequencies we weren't supposed to acknowledge," he continued. "Stuff that showed up on the scopes. Things we logged as equipment malfunction, even when we knew better." "What were they?" Maddie asked softly. "They called them ambient anomalies. We called them visitors." She blinked. "Are you saying you were tracking UFOs?" "I'm saying some things in this world speak in ways we're not meant to understand," he replied, looking her dead in the eye. "And when you start answering back, that's when the real trouble starts." Before she could ask more, the distant sound of an engine broke the moment. That same utility truck was back, rolling slow along the access road. "Go inside," Walter said sharply. "Dad, who are they?" "I don't know," he muttered. "And I don't want to. Just go." Maddie backed toward the house, but stopped by the kitchen window. She watched as her father walked down the gravel driveway to meet the truck. 2 men stepped out. Same gray uniforms, same build, same 2 smooth, mirrored movements. They spoke briefly. Walter nodded several times. One of the men handed him something, a small card. Then, without another word, they climbed back in and drove away, disappearing into the dust. Walter walked back to the house. His face looked tight, pale. "Electric company," he said before she could open her mouth. "Just checking lines." "Come on, Dad," she said. "They move in sync. They don't even blink the same way we do." He placed the card on the counter. It was blank except for a single phone number. The last 4 digits were 3333. Walter glanced at her. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "it's better to ask permission than forgiveness." Then the screen blinked. The library's internet dropped without warning. Around her, other patrons groaned. The librarian at the front desk stood up and announced, "Sorry folks, we're having some technical difficulties." By the time Maddie got home, her post was gone. Not just removed, vanished, as if it had never existed. Even her local backup of the recording wouldn't open anymore. That evening, as golden light stretched long shadows across the cornfields outside her window, Maddie noticed something strange. A utility truck was parked near the edge of their land, just beyond the fence line. 2 men stood beside it, in gray uniforms, matching outfits, matching postures. They weren't working, just watching the house. She squinted. Something about them looked wrong. Their movements, when they shifted, were too in sync, unnaturally so. Like they weren't moving separately, but as mirror images of each other. She blinked. Gone. No truck, no men. Just the gravel road, dust blowing gently across it. At exactly 3:33 a.m., Maddie was back in the equipment shed behind the house. The same place where her dad used to tinker with old ham radios. Headphones on, she tuned the battered receiver to 88.1 FM. The signal had returned. Stronger now, louder. The rhythm pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. Mathematical sequences scrolled across her notepad, evolving in real time, becoming more complex, more urgent. Outside, in the stillness, she heard the cornstalks rustling. But not randomly. They swayed in time with the signal. In perfect synchrony. Maddie must have drifted off at some point, because she woke to the sharp chime of her computer rebooting. The startup tone cut through the silence like a knife. She sat up, startled. The glowing clock on her nightstand said 3:33 a.m. Again. She hadn't set an alarm. The computer had turned itself on. She watched, heart thudding in her chest, as the screen flashed white, then opened a blank document. A single line of text appeared. "Not for you to hear." The cursor blinked. Once, twice, then the screen went dark. Computer shut down on its own. Maddie hadn't touched the keyboard. She hadn't even been near the computer. She sat frozen, staring into the black screen, the pounding of her heart the only sound in the room. By morning, the sunlight didn't help. The world looked the same, but felt off. While checking the fence, after breakfast, she found something new. A perfect circle flattened into the corn, 10 feet across. A spiral winding inward. The stalks weren't broken, just pressed down, uniform, clean, as if shaped by an invisible weight. "Dad," she called out, spotting him working near the irrigation pump. "Come look at this." Walter walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. His expression was unreadable as he studied the formation. "Wind damage," he said flatly. Maddie stared at him. "Wind doesn't make perfect circles," she said. "Not like this, not with geometric precision. And it doesn't just show up the night I record a strange signal." Walter let out a long sigh and pulled off his cap, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "I worked radar systems before I took over this farm," he said quietly. "Air Force, 85 to 91, North Dakota border mostly. Maddie already knew this, but something in his voice made her go still. There were frequencies we weren't supposed to acknowledge, he continued. Stuff that showed up on the scopes. Things we logged as equipment malfunction, even when we knew better. What were they? Maddie asked softly. They called them ambient anomalies. We called them visitors, she blinked. Are you saying you were tracking UFOs? I'm saying some things in this world speak in ways we're not meant to understand, he replied, looking her dead in the eye. And when you start answering back, that's when the real trouble starts. Before she could ask more, the distant sound of an engine broke the moment. That same utility truck was back, rolling slow along the access road. Go inside, Walter said sharply. Dad, who are they? I don't know, he muttered. And I don't want to. Just go. Maddie backed toward the house, but stopped by the kitchen window. She watched as her father walked down the gravel driveway to meet the truck. Two men stepped out. Same gray. Uniforms, same build. Same two smooth, mirrored movements. They spoke briefly. Walter nodded several times. One of the men handed him something, a small card. Then, without another word, they climbed back in and drove away, disappearing into the dust. Walter walked back to the house. His face looked tight, pale. Electric company, he said before she could open her mouth. Just checking lines. Come on, Dad, she said. They move in sync. They don't even blink the same way we do. He placed the card on the counter. It was blank except for a single phone number. The last 4 digits were 3,333. Walter glanced at her. Sometimes, he said slowly, it's better to ask permission than forgiveness. That afternoon, while her father dozed on the couch, Maddie drove into town and parked beside the Granger Historical Society, a dusty, underfunded annex attached to City Hall. Inside, a single elderly volunteer looked up from behind a cluttered desk, clearly startled to have company. Hi, Maddie said. I'm looking for information on any radio stations or transmission towers that might have operated around here, Maddie explained to the woman behind the desk, her voice hushed but insistent. Especially during the Cold War, anything with an unusual broadcast history. The elderly volunteer adjusted her glasses, pursing her lips. That'd probably be the old emergency broadcast station. Close down in ... 97 or so. Never really broadcasted much that I recall. More of a backup. Where was it located? Maddie asked, already reaching for her notebook. About 8 miles north of town. There's nothing left now, but some concrete and weeds. Maybe a few bolts in the ground. Maddie thanked her and left. Directions scribbled hastily on paper. The site was easy enough to find. A concrete slab half buried in tall weeds, with the rusted base of what used to be a transmission tower still visible. But it wasn't the tower remains that caught her eye, it was what lay beneath. A sealed metal hatch. Weathered but intact, its surface streaked with rust, still bearing faded government markings. Maddie crouched beside it, fingers tracing the stenciled designation. ARCS node 0. She snapped pictures from every angle. Back home, she dove into research mode. ARCS, Agricultural Region Communication System. Officially, it was designed to warn rural communities of incoming nuclear strikes during the Cold War. But a declassified file from 1989 hinted at something else. Passive monitoring, anomalous frequency capture. She broadened her search to include other ARCS nodes. What she found chilled her. 6 defunct ARCS sites spread across Iowa. Nebraska and South Dakota formed a perfect hexagon when mapped. And Granger? Smack in the center. That night, as the clock struck 3:33 a.m., the signal came back again. It was clearer, now sharper. But embedded deep within the repeating patterns, Maddie found something new. Her name. Translated into binary code. The signal knew who was listening. At dawn, she found a folded note pushed under the front door. Do not transmit IT. High-risk. The word chilled her more than she could explain. Later that morning, while checking on the cattle, she noticed they had all gathered tightly in the far corner of the pasture, pressed against the fence, as far from the cornfield as they could get. Heads low, sides trembling, eyes glassy with fear. They wouldn't graze, even though the grass was lush and untouched. Something had them terrified. By noon, the cornfield had changed again. It was subtle at first, a strange curvature to the rows, a shift in the natural growth pattern. But as Maddie walked deeper between the stalks, her stomach twisted. Entire sections of corn were growing in slow, perfect spirals, winding clockwise. The leaves twisted around each other, forming patterns that mimicked the frequency readouts on her computer screen. She rushed back to the house and called the number from the blank card. The line clicked. A mechanical voice answered. 72158. Delta, node. 0. It continued for nearly a minute, reciting numbers and nonsense syllables before abruptly disconnecting. Maddie redialed. This time, a different voice. Answered flat, emotionless, but human. Connor's residence. 88.1 observation. It wasn't a question. Maddie froze. Who is this? How do you know my frequency? Your frequency? The voice echoed with a faint, eerie amusement. It's been transmitting since 1941. You're just the newest receiver. The line went dead. When Walter returned later that afternoon with farm supplies from town, Maddie met him at the truck. Before he could unload, "What's node 0?" she asked. "What's under that slab north of town?" Walter looked tired, defeated. His shoulders sagged under the weight of something he clearly didn't want to talk about. "I signed papers, Maddie," he said after a moment. "We all did. Everyone who's owned this land since the 40s. Easement. Agreements. Monitoring rights." He nodded toward the fields. "They said it was dormant. That it hadn't sent out a readable signal in decades." "Who said?" She pressed. "People who know enough to be afraid," Walter muttered, eyes dark. "And smart enough not to interfere." That night, Maddie dreamt of the cornfield, but it wasn't like before. The rows swayed and pulsed, like waves on a black ocean. At the center of the field, the earth cracked open, not into soil, but into something metallic. Something impossibly vast. A mechanical eye opened beneath her feet. Ancient. Watching. Alive. She woke up gasping, tangled in sheets, heart racing. A soft blue glow filled her bedroom, no lamp on, no screens active. The light came from nowhere and everywhere. Her computer screen flickered to life on its own. Spectrogram visuals bloomed across it in slow, swirling patterns appearing, dissolving, reappearing again, though no programs were running. She turned toward the corner of the room. 2 figures stood there. The men from the utility truck. They hadn't made a sound. The door was still locked. "She's resonating now," one of them said, voice layered with distortion, like speech playing through a cracked speaker, becoming antenna. The other replied, tilting his head slightly, in perfect sync. Maddie reached for the bedside lamp. When light flooded the room, they were gone. By morning, the air had shifted. Locals called it pressure front weather, the heavy stillness before a storm. But this wasn't heat, lightning, or humidity. This was something else. The clouds over Granger didn't look like rain clouds. They were dark and motionless, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. The sky above the field seemed hollow and wrong. Maddie stood on the porch, watching as barn swallows darted frantically across the sky, then vanished. Even the insects had gone quiet. The corn, however, had grown another 6 inches overnight. Stalks no longer reached for the sun. They bent inward, curving toward the center of the property, as though drawn by some invisible pull. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "The pattern completes today. Stay indoors after sunset." Maddie tried to reply, but the message bounced back. UNDELIVE. Walter had left. early before dawn for a farm auction in Des Moines. She was alone, alone with the spiraling fields, the silenced sky, and a signal that knew her name. And for the first time in her life, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It was clear she wouldn't find more answers in town, at least not from the usual places. So Maddie headed to the Granger Public Library. The building was old, with a faint smell of must and paper, and its local history section was tucked into a cramped corner near the back. Still, it had what she needed: yellowed newspaper clippings, brittle folders, and archives stretching back to the 1930s. She approached the front desk. "Hi, I'm looking for anything on the founding of the emergency broadcast station that used to be up north." The librarian, an older woman with glasses hanging from a beaded chain, looked up. "Funny you should ask," she said, disappearing into a back room. She returned a moment later, holding out a dusty folder. "Someone else was digging into those old broadcast stations just last month. Left this behind. Might be useful." Maddie took the folder and found a table. Inside were photocopies of newspaper articles from 1941 documenting the tower's construction. But what caught her eye were pages of handwritten notes, most of them in Cyrillic script. Paper clipped to the notes was a faded black and white photograph. 7 men in military uniforms stood stiffly in front of a half-finished radio tower. On the back, scrawled in faint pencil, it read, "Joint Monitoring Initiative, USUSR, April 1941. Maddie stared at it. "That can't be right," she muttered. The US and Soviets weren't allies until after Pearl Harbor. That was December. This photo's dated April, 8 months earlier. She flipped through more papers. A folded diagram slipped free and fluttered to the floor. When she picked it up, her brow furrowed. It was a technical schematic labeled Receiving Configuration, Subterranean Frequency Capture. The image showed the radio tower's foundation extending deep underground, far deeper than needed for any standard build. The structure seemed to connect to a vast pre-existing underground chamber. As she photographed everything with her phone, something wedged deep inside the folder caught her attention. A sealed envelope. The paper was brittle, the edges curled and yellowed. She carefully opened it. August 15, 1982. To whoever finds this account. My name is Alexei Baranov, formerly captain of Soviet Air Defense Forces. I am what your government would call a defector, though I did not leave for freedom or politics. I left because both our nations lie about what sleeps beneath your American heartland. In 1982, I was assigned to a joint monitoring project. Publicly, it was atmospheric research. In truth, we were tracking signals from an object discovered in 1926. American farmers found it after what they believed was a meteorite impact. But it wasn't a meteorite. It was manufactured ancient, and it lay buried far deeper than any natural fall could account for. The governments didn't know what to do. So they built 6 listening posts disguised as rural radio stations. Granger was the center of that web. For decades, the object was quiet, just faint pulses at regular intervals, like a heartbeat in hibernation. But something changed. The signals are more complex now. Evolving, it's waking up. And it's not just reaching our stations anymore. It's reaching out to the stars. I write this as a warning. When the pattern completes, when the connection is made, I fear what might answer. If you are reading this, look to the fields. They will change first. A Baranovmedi's hands were shaking by the time she finished. She folded the letter carefully, heart pounding. 1982. That was around when Dad was stationed here with the Air Force. Had he known about this? Was he involved? Outside, the sky had darkened with an unnatural hue, greenish, almost copper, the kind of sky that usually came before tornadoes. But the air was perfectly still. Her phone had no service. Downtown was unusually quiet for a weekday. No cars, no people. On the drive home, Maddie couldn't stop thinking about the letter. Then she saw something that made her foot ease off the gas. Cornfields along the highway. They'd changed. That morning they'd been growing in neat, uniform rows. Now they twisted into massive, intricate spiral patterns that seemed to shift as you looked at them, creating illusions. Movement, like the earth itself was breathing. When she turned into her gravel driveway, her pulse spiked. The same utility truck was there again, and standing beside it. Those same two men, identical, perfectly still. She didn't drive past them this time. She stopped, parked directly in front of them, and got out. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice steady despite the panic building in her chest. "What's happening to our farm?" They turned toward her in unison. Up close it was worse. Their faces weren't just similar, they were exactly the same. Same blank stare. Same emotionless mask. As if they were trying to pretend to be human, but didn't quite know how. "Resonance testing," one of them said. "Calibration complete." The other added. Maddie stepped closer. "That doesn't mean anything. What's underneath our land? What the hell is a RCS Node 0? The first man tilted his head slightly. "Not what, who?" "It was always listening," said the second. "Now it's answering." "Answering what?" She pressed, the question it was sent to ask. Then, without warning, one of them handed her a small white card. Blank except for a set of GPS coordinates. They climbed back into the truck and drove away. Without another word, Maddie pulled out her phone and entered the coordinates. Her screen zoomed in on the map, and the location matched the center of their property. Dead center, right where the corn grew tallest, where the new spiral pattern seemed to converge. She drove straight there, the sky behind her bleeding into dusk. Shadows from the twisted corn stretched long across the fields. The place the coordinates pointed to was a low patch of land they rarely planted. Her father always said the soil was too wet there after storms. Too unpredictable. Now she wondered if that was the real reason, or if he'd known exactly what was buried beneath their farm all along. Now it made sense. The soil at the center of the field, normally just patchy earth and weeds, had turned almost black, its surface shimmering faintly like iron filings under a magnet. As the last light of day slipped away, the ground began to glow with a soft bluish hue, not steady but pulsing. Steady and rhythmic, just like the radio signal she'd heard days earlier. Her phone chimed. "Dad, don't go near the center field. Coming home now, too late." Maddie was already standing right at the edge of the depression. She wasn't moving, couldn't move. The earth in front of her looked alive. It shifted gently, like something beneath was pushing upward. Through the thinning soil, she glimpsed glints of metal, lined with impossible patterns, precise geometric etchings unlike anything man-made. Then her phone rang. Unknown caller. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Matilda Connors." The voice was calm, urgent. Familiar. It was the same person who'd spoken to her during that strange intercepted call. "You need to leave, right now. The pattern completes at 3:33. She gripped the phone tighter. "What happens at 3:33? "It finishes constructing the receiver, and then ... it waits." "For what?" A pause. "We don't know. That's what scares us." The ground gave a sudden, subtle shudder. Maddie instinctively stepped back as a section of the soil gave way, just enough to reveal more of what was underneath. A metallic surface, dull and ancient-looking, inscribed with symbols that looked like mathematical equations and abstract diagrams. The exposed part glowed with that same familiar blue. Her chest tightened. Her phone flickered, glitching. Then a new message appeared. On the screen, coordinates matched. Receiver identified. Maddie slowly looked up and noticed something terrifying. The stars above her farm were disappearing, one by one. The sky was going dark, not obscured, erased. In their place, something else emerged. A faint, swirling pattern etched itself into the night, forming slowly, methodically. The same spiral design she had seen days ago while analyzing the signal spectrogram. And then, at exactly 3:33 a.m., everything turned on. The house lights, her laptop, the busted old transmitter in the shed, even the microwave. Every electronic device in the area sprang to life and emitted the same pulsing tone, now loud enough to feel deep in her chest, like pressure from the inside out. The depression in the center of the field opened wider like a flower blooming in reverse. The dirt crumbled away, revealing more of the structure below. What lay beneath was enormous, a disc-shaped object with a surface that seemed impossibly old. Lines, equations, symbols, some shifted before her eyes, rearranging in ways that defied logic. Then a beam of light shot upward. Perfect. Blinding. Coherent dot it pierced the heavens, slicing through the spiral void where stars had once been. The transmission had begun. Moments later, headlights flashed behind her. Tires screeched on gravel. Her father's truck came to a skidding halt in the driveway. "Maddie!" he shouted, voice breaking as he slammed the door and ran toward her. "Get back to the house. Now! It's not safe." She didn't move. Couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the column of light, the beam that connected the earth to something far beyond. "What is it, Dad?" she asked quietly. "What is it really?" Walter reached her, breathless, fear etched into his face. "They called it a beacon. When I was stationed at the monitoring facility, we thought it was dormant, buried, dead. But then a lightning strike in 1926, it activated something. Just enough to register a signal." "So you studied it," she said, her voice shaking. "We built the Granger post to listen to monitor it without waking it up," Walter said. "At first it was just the US and Soviets, but then others joined. Scientists, military, people who understood what this could mean." The hum grew louder. The beam widened, becoming a transparent column of shimmering distortion. Everything behind it twisted, warped. The very air seemed to bend into unnatural shapes. Vertices curled in on themselves. Lines folded into loops. The laws of geometry no longer applied within that light. "Maddie," her father said, gripping her arm, "we need to leave, now. They're evacuating everyone inside the zone."